Okay, share, boom. Hey, look at that. It worked again. Well, thank you everyone for coming this evening. That sounds so odd sitting here looking at my computer. But I am going to not look at the chat window as we go because that will distract me a little bit and may keep me from going all the way through the presentation that I've kind of cooked up here. So I have some thoughts on habitat enhancements, which is a topic that builds off of the four that we did, because we did species diversity, animal damage, dead wood, and now enhancements. These were kind of four bundled topics that we thought might be relevant to small forest landowners and people that know people that own or manage small forest land. And so that's our target audience. And we tried something this time where we wanted this movie theme just for catchy titles. And I give Kevin big credit for this. So this one was, remember this movie, The Field of Dreams, and Costner put the ball field in the cornfield and everything. And the old baseball players walked out. Well, this right here is the Wildlife Forestry Field of Dreams. It's on Vashon Island. And it's a ball field in a Douglas fir stand. And at night, under a full moon, black-tailed deer and maybe pileated woodpeckers will cross that ball field, just like the baseball players in Costner's film. So if you build it, they will come. And so that's actually true of habitats, that something's going to show up. And whether it's what you anticipate or not, well, we'll see about that. So here's my set of topics. We're going to just speak about wildlife in general and limiting factors on their populations, habitat management and manipulations, and then just a few common enhancements, meaning common things that people do, and maybe how they would affect the species. So just by way of introduction, again, you are here, Washington State. It's approximately 2/3 forested, all the way from the wet forest way out here on the coast to the Cascades, the Puget Sound Trough, and the drier forest on the east side and our Rocky Mountain forest up here. And basically, the fauna is consistent. Many species are consistent across this whole set of forest types. I mean, obviously not all, but it's a consistent landscape in regard to the coniferous dominated forest. And our small forest landowners, many of whom are in the virtual room here, own about 4.5 million acres of the 22 million acres of forest land in the state of Washington. That's a lot. And there's this is 2007 numbers, so that's outdated, but there's somewhere between this number and 250,000 families or individuals who own this land. So this stuff in this dark green right here, these are the people that we help. And we, meaning the WSU team, Brendan, Kevin, and the DNR team, Matt, myself, and the conservation district. So we help people work with their forest. And we have lots of wonderful landowners. And we have this really, really fortunate thing that our jobs are marvelous because we get to go out and meet people like Ms. Darley here. So we help people with between 5 and I say 2,000, because when you get up there, a lot of times it'll become kind of a little corporation, but we help people write plans. We point them at cost shares. We give them advice. And I said this, we work closely with WSU Extension and the Conservation District. So that's Matt Preventure right there on the right. And that's Julie Sackett, our boss. And that's me in the middle. So here we go. So let's go to wildlife. There's about 400 species of vertebrate wildlife associated with the forest, all the way from hummingbirds up to moose or elk, bears, and everything in between, in amphibians, reptiles, mammals, and birds. And when you look at this fauna, the herpetofauna, the amphibians and reptile, have the fewest species numbers, which makes a little bit of sense because we live in a somewhat northerly climate, and these are cold-blooded animals. And then the mammals, that's really not that many mammals in the forested environment, but it's quite a few. Many of the megafauna, charismatic megafauna, are mammals. Birds, we actually have quite a few bird species. There's about 350 associated with the forest. This list is just all of the species. And then insects and mollusks. I mean, insects, of course, and entomologists love to point this out, are the most diverse set of the animal kingdom. But point being, we have a pretty diverse fauna. Okay, here's a little bit of wildlife biology 101. Many of you know this, but wildlife has four basic needs: food, water, cover, and space. And so food, any given organism has its particular niche of what it eats. Say the waxwing, fruit-eating bird that would consume fruits. Every animal needs water. It's got to get water somehow, not always getting a drink per se. Many animals will get their water through their food, but they've all got to have water in some form. They got to have cover. They got to have some place to rest, to raise their young. Like this hollow log right here had a Douglas squirrel midden in it where the squirrel would hide their harvested cones. And every animal has to have room to do its thing. And so you may have larger animals, like this is a theoretical cougar territory that could be 5 miles by 10 miles, or you might have Douglas squirrel that lives in 3 to 5 acres right on this hillside, its whole life right there. And you might have small mammals, say a shrew or a mouse or something, that's down there living under, that bush and that rock, its entire thing. Well, those variables apply to every species in any given place. And all of them have got to be present within the home range, which is the zone that the animal gets its life history needs to survive and reproduce, to succeed at being a wild animal. It's got to have all of those key things. So this hairy woodpecker had to be able to catch insects like that. I believe that's a spider, and had to have a properly sized den. I believe this is an alder in order to reproduce. And is that in this stand right here? I'm not sure. It could well be. So all of that must be present to survive. So many of you have seen this before. Wildlife management looks at this trend line. So any given population of wildlife will tend to vacillate around some unknown, it's not a mean, it's just a level. And that level varies, but it's determined by this thing called limiting factors. And the limiting factor could be many, many things. It could be, a predator, like something biotic. It could be non-living, abiotic, like water. It could even be something that comes from the presence of human, anthropogenic. And I've thought about this one. You might, right, for example, you might have a pond with breeding amphibians, salamanders or frogs, let's say, and in the late spring, they would leave that water after breeding or going to the water to breed, and they might cross a busy road. And if that road was wet at night, those animals could get run over, and that could be a limiting factor. The presence of that road could be the limiting factor on the survival of those frogs. So that's kind of an extreme example. But so limiting factors can be many things. And now forest environment, and I really like to point this out. Excuse me. There's a frog in my throat. One just hopped out of that pond there. That forests are complex layered habitats. They've got the canopy overhead, they've got the big trees and the medium-sized trees, they've got some dead trees, down logs, this shrub layer right here. And these habitats exist in a complex landscape. Well, the human influence on the landscape, we tend to simplify habitats. We tend to make them more uniform. And I put this in here as a set. This looks like a typical second growth forest that's undergone thinning and harvest and that sort of thing. And it's lacking in some of the canopy complexity. Many times we do industrial activities. Here's where a big tree was and next to somebody's house, actually. But we've simplified that. Or, we even have examples where we do even age forestry. This is out by Lake Quinault. And this stand right here is about 25 years old. And this stand were the same. So this is a Douglas fir plantation being grown basically like wheat. And so that's a very simplified habitat type right there. Or you might have things like removing hazard trees along a trail in a park. So through manipulation, we tend to simplify habitats, which can create something of a bottleneck on some of those limiting factors. So what the heck was that all about? Well, it's leading up to this point, that sometimes we can address limiting factors through our enhancements. And an enhancement would be something that goes above and beyond the basic habitat, but might fill in a gap. It might fill in a gap where something that otherwise would help the animal survive, you can bring it in here. And I love this sign here on the right. This is one of our landowners that was doing it all. And right here on the American Tree Farm system, there's water, wood, recreation, and wildlife. So wildlife is an important objective for many people. So let's start out with some of the limiting factors and things you can do. This is a pretty simple one. And as many of you know, I'm a bit of a fanatic about standing dead trees. I'm a snagophobe. No, wait. Did I say that right, Brendan? No, a snagophile.
Definitely snagophile.
Thank you. I am not afraid of them. And so a standing dead tree can provide a lot of habitat for a lot of organisms. And we had a whole webinar, 2 weeks ago about dead wood. And I won't say too much about the ecology of it, but it's just really important stuff, you know, in the nest cavities and everything. And if you don't have dead trees on your property, you actually might consider creating some, killing some trees. And in reality, most of our stands are overstocked. Most of our stands that we have on our small ownerships have more trees than they really need to thrive. And I think I wouldn't get disagreement from Matt or Brendan on that. Not always, but often. And you know what? You can make some snags. And when you make a snag, what you're mimicking are these type of structures, these broken off ones where the stem has busted off somewhere in the middle. And look, there's a woodpecker cavity. There's a woodpecker cavity. Here's another one. Here's a natural, the habitat tree sign on it. And so you can mimic those by way of, hire a climber, or if you're a climber yourself, go up there, knock the top out of the tree, take the saw, make it just a little bit rough, and I'll say something about that. And these guys are remarkably skilled, and they'll happily do that for you. So what you want to do is remove the crown, because it takes the weight out of that woody structure. And this is actually a created snag from 20 years ago, right now, year 2000. And look at all these cavities in it. So this one was topped and roughed up. And so they need to be like somewhere between 8 and 50 feet. And I say 50, but if you look at a tree, basically it usually winds up being kind of optimal, being about a third to 25 to 50, or a third of the height of the tree comes off. And the top diameter should be, I say 10 to 12 inches, because that is a kind of minimum diameter for the medium-sized woodpeckers. So that would be the hairy woodpecker, the flicker, the sapsuckers can actually put a nesting cavity in something of about that size. Now, I didn't mention this earlier, but a small one, and even when you're doing a thinning, a small snag that's only 4 to 6 inches in diameter, cut off basically at chest high, and you can do this yourself, will provide habitat for small birds. And so, yeah, you take your saw and you just kind of rough up the top, and it looks a little more natural, so you don't look at that flat top and go, what the heck's that? And it also gives more surface area for water and fungus and that sorts of things. Now, this is an important one, because we run into a lot of situations where the landowner will say, is that tree dangerous? It's right by my house. Well, it might well be. It might well be a hazard tree in that it could fall on something. And so what you can do is shorten that thing, get your arborist, and this is a wonderful example. These people over in Snohomish, nice family, had a dead cedar tree on the edge of their yard, and the arborist said, well, I can make a habitat tree, and he did. So there's the roughened top, and if this thing toppled over, which by the way, it probably won't, because once they're short enough, so this tree is about 18 feet high, and I have heard stories numerous times where people had one of these on their yard, and they enjoyed watching the birds and the woodpeckers use these structures. So hazard to habitat, good tactic, but we don't want you to try it yourself. So this picture on the right was actually taken in Matt Provencher's backyard when he took out a tree just lately. Wasn't that your little backhoe and ladder there, Matt? I'm just kidding. No, it wasn't. Anyone from Longview, Washington, this is the world's largest squirrel. And it's a chainsaw carving in the park right in the middle of town. And it has a flicker cavity in it. So it actually is a snag shaped like a squirrel. So that one's okay. Don't do that on the right. We really don't want you to do this yourself. Don't be climbing up on ladders. Okay, so that was by way of disclaimer, by the way. You can also kill trees by girdling. So you can make a, what do you call it, a cut. And this one might be a little narrow, but we usually say like 4 to 6 inches down through the phloem, and this will kill this tree. In fact, this tree is on Ken Miller's tree farm, and it is now a standing dead snag. That picture was taken 5 years ago. I need to put the one next to it. But it worked, and it might rot out here at the bottom and topple over. But you know what? This is a good tactic if you're thinning. You might actually create some snags in your thinning project, and they will stand there for a long time and then topple. So I've seen a project where they girdled the tops of trees in order to have them break. This was on the Green River watershed, and here's another landowner, Lisa, down in the Blue Mountains, checking her girdle on a pine in a plantation. So she was trying to make some snags there. So if you're doing a harvest unit, which many of us will these days, they will use these mechanical harvesters. And you can have these machines create snags out of either trees with butt defect or just in general. Now watch this, 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005, 1006, 1007, 1008, 1009, 1010, 1011, 1012, 1013, 1014. In 14 seconds, that guy made an 8-foot snag right there. So what I suggest is when you're doing a harvest, you tell your loggers, okay, you're doing a 10-acre harvest. I want 20 or 10. Tell them 2 per acre. And they can even do this with hazard trees. If they have a snag that you're worried about, they can nip it off with that thing. These are incredible machines. And it's way safer. Logging with these things is way safer than it was. But anyway, so just instruct them. Say, you know what, man? And these work. Go to Suncadia, if you know where that is, over by Roslyn. And they created like 500 of these structures in the neighborhoods before they built. And here, 20 years later, they're full of woodpecker holes. I like this one. You can install snags. Now, this sounds kind of crazy, but where I sit right here at my home office, that snag on the left, I'm looking at it right here out the window. And a few moments ago, there was a bluebird sitting on it. And so I took a ponderosa pine and I got it down from our place down below, dug a hole, had my friend help me. We carried it up there. It's about 12 feet high. It's not a cavity snag. It's not big enough on top, but it's a marvelous perch. And I treated the bottom of it with just some kind of wood treatment just to slow down rot. This one on the right, if anybody knows Phil Hess, and I believe John Matson, you know Phil Hess. Phil Hess is a forester over in Cle Elum. He's been around for a long time. And Phil got the snag bug. And he had a friend who ran a mill and gave him some, he called them long butts. So this is a ponderosa pine log. And he dug a hole with a backhoe, put gravel in the bottom, put this thing in there, stuffed gravel around it so that it would drain about 15 years ago. See all these cavities, 1, 2, 3, 4. He said he has a white-headed woodpecker nest right in front of his house. And Phil is just really tickled with this induced snag. So it's a pretty cool thing going on. Look at all those cavities there. This and an osprey platform. How many people have seen an osprey platform? Well, excuse me, but that's an installed snag with a little enhancement feature. And these things work. It's pretty interesting. This is over on Lopez Island, and they did a wetland mitigation, and they installed a couple of snags here. So you can put them out there. So yeah, that's another way to get some snags on the landscape. Okay. Man, that frog is just hanging out. Okay, so primary cavity excavators, this is a little bit of a reminder. The woodpeckers will regularly make cavities in dead wood. And the pileated woodpecker makes these these rectangular oval holes. And woodpeckers feed deep in the wood or in the wood going after boring insects that are not necessarily threats to forest health. So once a tree is dead and entering the decay process, the woodpeckers are actually top of the food chain feeding on these things. So this is by way of reminder that standing dead trees that have been there for a while really are not a threat to your living trees, but they will make a new nest cavity most years, sometimes even 2. They'll clean out old ones, but a nest cavity, and I wished I had clarified this, but this is a pileated. Pileated's a big bird, about the size of a crow. That hole right there is about 2.5 feet deep inside of that tree, and that hole right there that's the big ones. The pileated make the biggest ones. Then there's our hairy woodpecker, and I like to describe the hairy as every man's woodpecker, about the size of a robin, can live in all different forest types, and they can use a tree, about 10, even smaller, 8 to 12 inches to make a cavity, which is about, so let's say 12 inches deep instead of 24 inches deep. And so it's just a question of scale. And so they will do the same thing. They'll make new cavities every year in the trees that are out there. Well, we have, okay, yeah, so here you go. So here's a great example of a cavity tree. And a cavity tree like this is an extremely valuable habitat feature. This is a larch, and I'm waving my cursor around here, but there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. There was like 14 separate cavity excavations on this side of this particular tree, which had been dead for many decades and was being used over and over. This thing on the right is a borescope camera. It's a shot of the screen where Jeff Kozma, a wildlife biologist who also is a woodpecker fanatic, was looking at a white-headed woodpecker nest. So this is what's inside of those cavities when the birds are using them. So those are baby woodpeckers. And so a nest box imitates those abandoned woodpecker cavities. So I'm getting to nest boxes as an enhancement. A birdhouse is not a nest box. A birdhouse, they're fun, but they're generally non-functional. I mean, I love that they're done in different architectural styles, like a church and a school and a cabin. But these are not intended as habitat. They're intended as decorations, which is fun, admittedly, but that's a different deal than what we're trying to do with a nest box. So a nest box is a cavity surrogate. They're actually built to a scale that is representative of those two species putting out the cavity. So like this is a representation of a hairy woodpecker cavity right there, a bluebird style box. This is a funky hollow log that's not deep enough to be pileated, but really got a lot of use. So some of the users could include swallows or squirrels. The Douglas squirrels really, and flying squirrels really like to use these things. It doesn't matter what they look like on the outside, so you can have fun with different decorations. This one had swallows in it this year yet again. And over here on the right, here are wood ducks. Wood ducks are cavity nesters and evolved probably in wetland systems using pileated and hollow trees all across North America. Well, we've diminished that habitat type so much, and over the years there's been an aggressive, maybe that's the wrong word, an enthusiastic campaign to put up wood duck boxes, and many of us have either helped do that or seen them or heard about it, and it's worked. They think that most of the wood ducks in North America, of which there are quite a few, they're hunted species, come out of a box somewhere. And this is on Mark Beiser's place over by Shelton. And these are two hen wood ducks. And anyway, it works. So the limiting factor could be dead trees with adequate cavities, and your solution could be to provide some boxes. So this is a really great example. This gentleman down near Mossy Rock had 3 wood duck boxes near this little pond, and he was proud of the fact that most years he had wood ducks. Here's a baffle to keep the raccoons from climbing up there and eating them. There's a whole science to box management and everything, which is worth studying. But to be able to provide a home for wood ducks was extremely gratifying for this gentleman down there by Mossy Rock. So this is kind of Ken's punchline on nest boxes, because if you go online and Google up nest boxes, you're going to get a little bit Google boggled. Because there's going to be so many different designs, sizes, and everything. And I really think that you can kind of boil it down to these 2 sizes, and that is the bluebird size or the songbird size. That's this guy right here, 1.5 inch hole, 7 inches down, and a Kestrel wood duck bigger version that more or less mimics a pileated woodpecker cavity, bigger hole, and That's all you really need. It's better if you can put them up a little ways, like ladder height, but it's not essential at all. And I've had this discussion numerous times with people. Do I have to put them up in the tree? I honestly believe the big boxes do better when they're a little ways up, but they'll be used down low. And I've had numerous testimonials from landowners who have uh, really gotten into boxes. And one gentleman in particular, he's like, you know what, I don't want to fall off the ladder, and I get use when I put them right where I can reach them. So just that. And so I'm going to give you some information at the end of where to look up the designs, and you could hit me with an email, and I have these very boxes right there um, set up. So this one on the right is kind of interesting because they did a series of boxes intending them for saw-whet owls or pygmy owls up in the Okanagan Highlands, kind of near Bonaparte Lake. And they were hoping for kestrels and things, and they got flying squirrels. They got flying squirrels in almost every single box, which I thought was totally cool. It's like, really? Flying squirrels up in that not subalpine, but high elevation wet forest. So you can get all sorts of different creatures in your boxes. But here's the wrinkle. You got to maintain them, because this is what happens. They break. They fail at the roof. They fail at the side. And if you don't go back and fix them or clean them out. So this one on the right is a swallow on top of a bluebird, which is really pretty interesting because the bluebirds managed to nest first, and then the swallows came in and nested after that. And it's really fun to see all this stuff in there. Like, here's an owl feather, here's duck feathers, here's fine grass. You find all kinds of stuff in there. And so in these boxes, every year, some people do it in the fall, some do it in the late winter. You clean all that stuff out, and then the songbirds will come back and do it again. And if you maintain these boxes, they can last a long time. This one's been up for at least 20 years. And I love this cedar shake on the roof, a little bit wider than the outside. They do not have to be made out of cedar because they will break before they rot, but they can last for decades. And it's a really cool project. If you decide to do some boxes, do a whole series of them, and you'll get something in them, and it's really kind of fun. So many people ask me about bat boxes. Well, bat boxes are essentially providing a roosting place for this animal that likes to go up into cracks, and so they need the proper spacing of the baffles. So a bat box is essentially a roughened on the inside box with a series of these, I call them baffles, but you can see the little scratches on here, and bats will go way up into the top. Well, I've heard many stories, and there's somebody listening to me right now who's going, well, I put up a bat box and I didn't get any bats. I think what bat boxes really need is the good design, and you can find that, and they need to be in a place that bats occur. I don't think bats are uniform across the landscape. They're more concentrated, particularly around water areas. This was at Turnbull Refuge right next to a shallow lake, and they got lots of use out of this rocket box style. This little platform was so they could see the dropping, so they knew if it was being used. This one is right next to the Columbia River, up there at Lazy Days Resort, Carol, up near Northport, and this box got tons of use. There was poop all over the ground down here, and the landowner said that they would fly into it at night. So bat boxes are kind of a specialty item that require some attention. Piles, I call them habitat piles. Now, a habitat pile is different than a brush pile, and the reason it's different is because you constructed it on purpose to stay there to provide habitat for organisms. If you're going to burn a pile, they're actually built reversed. So a habitat pile, you put the big stuff on the bottom, and you will stack it, arrange it. We'll get to that in a second. And then you put the finer stuff on top, so that as the finer stuff decays away, you still have some spaces down underneath for animals to go in there and use it as cover, food, water, cover. This is cover, and this is a great thing. I had one landowner tell me one time she thought the fastest thing you can do for wildlife is build a pile. So here's the bottom. You can put them at least 1, 2, 3, I like to say 3 to 5 layers. If you're in a wet climate, take that top layer and put them side by side, because imagine creating a dry space under there for any number of animals that might go in there and use it. And then you put the fine stuff on the top of it. And this structure was constructed for habitat and meant to be left. Different than a brush pile that you may actually burn. And you could find yourself in situations, and I've seen this in fuels reduction quite a few times, where if you did a big fuels reduction on a really dense stand, you're going to wind up with, oh gosh, somewhere between 15 and 20 piles to the acre. And I'll say, well, make 2 habitat piles and do it on purpose. You know, build them over there and over there away from the trees, just so that they're not a problem, so that they stay. Caveat, important one, in eastern Washington, don't use green ponderosa pine branches between like March and September, because you can actually produce a flush of bad beetles that'll wind up inadvertently killing some trees around there. So that's a caveat we have to throw in. The core of the pile, I had somebody ask me, could you make a rock pile? Yeah, sure, you actually could. I found a diagram from the southeast where it was for quail, and they had culverts in the bottom of a habitat pile, and then the stuff on top of it. And this guy, somebody had abandoned a car on his property, and he decided he was going to make it a habitat car. So the core of his pile was this car. Good idea, bad idea. There you go. So was out with a school group out near the coast, and we had a thinning in this particular stand. And I love this little sequence. So this is a group of school kids, 3rd and 4th graders, and we're going to build a pile. So we put the big stuff on the bottom. Here they go. They're picking up branches from the thinning. Ooh, she got sticky stuff on her hands. A little bit more. Let's get to work. There was a couple of kids who were really diligent, getting that middle part in there. Here we go. We're getting a little bit of layering on that thing. Oh man, there's the teacher. Hey, get over here. Put the fine stuff on the top. Time for the fine stuff here. Yep. There we go. Oh, pose for the picture. Oh, you're doing good work, kids. Here we go. Hey, almost done, almost done. This took about 20 minutes. Oh, yep, one more. And there they are, proud of the habitat pile, which is pretty cool. So this only took about 20 minutes, and they loved it. So piles are a wonderful thing to do with family and friends. Just put the big stuff on the bottom, and frankly, there's no right or wrong way to do it. So who might use this thing? Could be wrens. Wrens love these things. Small mammals, mice, voles. Reptiles like to get underneath of them. Chipmunks and ground squirrels. Small birds like chickadees. Squirrels, I've seen squirrel middens in those piles numerous times. And you might get lucky if you had a big enough tunnel or channel or chamber in the middle, you could get bobcat, coyote, or even a bear if it was big enough. So, I mean, be creative. Think about the type of organisms that may be going in there for cover when you build a pile. Try for 1 to 2 per acre. Build them on purpose and then watch them over time. It's pretty cool. It does work. Down logs. So in many cases, our past management has reduced the number of down logs. And a big log like that is a concentration of wood fiber, you know, as obviously, and it's going to lay there and break apart over time, you know, do the whole soil fertilization and everything. And if we don't have those big structures, you might actually create a downlog surrogate, which is smaller wood laid in a linear manner intended to stay there, as opposed to that small piece laying over there by itself. And, you know, the question might come up, well, is that better than a pile? You know, I would say they're the same but different. This is in essence what's at the bottom of a habitat pile, but this is going to create a more, what's the word, natural version of a decaying log. And so I've seen this in situations where we were getting rid of fine fuels by way of chipping. In fact, this is one right here. See all the chip stuff on the left? And then this is a log surrogate that will stay when the fuels reduction is done. You could put the two together. This is over on the west side. It's incomplete. This was actually a demonstration for a field day. But here's a little log surrogate on the left made out of alder. Crisscross some logs across the top, then put the fine stuff on the top, and voila, we've got a log surrogate with a pile on top of it. Question came up earlier, what species of wood should you use? And you know, a hardwood better than conifer. Frankly, when you're building a pile, it's usually an opportunistic thing. Just use what you got. Hardwood's fine. Conifers probably better. It might last longer, but that's fine, you know, because we're doing an enhancement. So let's be opportunistic. We'll concentrate some of this material, and we will provide food, water, cover. So now we're looking at food and cover to a certain extent, the shrub layer. So the shrub layer is kind of often overlooked as being a really important habitat type. We'll call it brush sometimes, you know, which is a little comical to me because brush is a derogatory. But fruit-bearing shrubs can be enormously important, well, because like a lot of birds eat them. And you can enhance your shrub layer by way of planting. And so this is Melvin. Melvin lives over there near Cleellum, and he is selling trees there. But you can get your plants from many different sources. You can even transplant them. And as you do this, look for ones that bear fruit and are good browse. And there's a whole bunch of different ones. A lot of them end in, I love that they end in berry, serviceberry, chokecherry, huckleberry, salmonberry. And look around your property. I am surprised, and a really interesting observation from this opportunity to travel around the state is the variety in the shrub layer is strikingly, what's the word? Evident even over short distances. So look and see what you have around, and the elderberries, red and blue are really good choices. The good stuff, you know, these berries are just marvelous food sources for wildlife. And a berry is meant to be eaten and pooped, and sure enough, and so salmonberry, even though it's a nightmare for walking through, is a really nice habitat plant. And what happens to all those berries? Well, something eats them. So when you plant a shrub diversity, plant to succeed. And that means, you know, you might mulch like Julie Sackett did out here near Oakville. And so she used cardboard to mulch to help get her Indian plum going here, or like this blue elder that was in a cage and managed to succeed. So the locally adapted species, they will bear fruit and flowers that are already adapted to the local fauna. So the pollinators know what to do with an elderberry, and they often will provide browse. Now we have a whole webinar, I believe, don't we, Brendan, about noxious weeds. And one of the elements, we do, good, okay. So I say fight the worst noxious competitors, and you're going to know which ones they are. You know, Scotch broom here in the middle, holly, ivy, even though ivy provides some cover, it overwhelms a tree. Himalayan blackberries being an interesting dilemma because lots and lots of birds and things eat the berries and use them. It's good cover, except it'll take over and you'll lose a lot of your species diversity. So one of your tasks as small forest landowners is to fight these guys and figure out which ones they are and take them out, you know, and if you're early on, that's good. So just by way of reference, you know, the shrub layer provides a lot of habitat. This particular place that day was full of birdsong. Lots of little migratory birds will use this habitat type. But the brush layer is still Rodney Dangerfield. I don't get no respect. Take my salmonberry, please. But it's a really valuable habitat that is worth maintaining and enhancing in the proper places. So it's one of our dilemmas. Food, water. Let's see, I've done a lot of cover. Food, yeah, we just did food. Food, water. Now, we're not going to really address territory because you can't really change that. But water, you know, like this little water feature that I installed in my backyard. It was a little tough digging it out and everything, but it looks good. The birds really like that. I'm kidding. Hopefully everybody knows that waterfall. But, you know, if you're lucky enough to have a little vernal pond like this one, and this one was full of chorus frogs that were calling, or a ephemeral wetland like this where an area gets water in it seasonally, could provide just enough time for amphibians to breed like these guys. And so it can be in many forms. Now, I'm not going to say anything about a full-blown pond per se, because pond construction where people try to get them big enough to have fish and everything, oh my gosh, that's an enormous expensive project that has a lot of wrinkles. But you can provide water to address the localized limiting factor in a lot of little ways. And this is out by Seebeck. And these people had a dry hilltop and there was no water anywhere nearby. There was salt water. And we walked around and I was like, Mr. Jones, maybe a water source. And he's like, okay. So he came up with this. And look at this little ramp right here. This is to help the chipmunks and the birds get in and out of it. And he put his game cam over it. And he almost immediately got all sorts of things using that. This is my puddle. I should have got a picture with water in it. But I dug a hole, put a liner in it, and snowmelt and rainwater. Right now that still has water in it, and it'll dry up about the 1st of July unless I go down there and put water in it. And I put my camera over it, and just about everybody in the neighborhood gets a drink right there. This is Mark Beiser, again, out there by Shelton, and this is a ephemeral pond that he actually dug out with permits, we might add, that has had a lot of amphibian use. So these small water sources can be extremely valuable for localized wildlife if there isn't water available somewhere nearby. So it's almost like the distance that animals will travel to get water, if you provide it, then that can actually change the way their home range is used. And I'm convinced of this. And even something as simple as a bird bath, some little feature. This was a spectacular one that I forgot her name, but this nice lady on Whidbey, they had built this lime pond, put all this gravel in here, had a pump, they fill it up, and this thing was used by all kinds of wildlife in this area because there was not other water nearby. So food, water, cover, those three things you can address with some pretty simple and straightforward habitat enhancements. But the very best methodology for providing, I want to say, for maximum wildlife. And most people are interested in wildlife to look at them and to feel like they're participating in the ecology. And so you want habitat complexity. You want some big trees, you want some open areas, you want some dead trees, you want lots of live trees, you want some grass, you want some shrubs, and mix all that stuff up so that the juxtaposition is such that these elk bed down in that dense stand, they get a drink right here, they eat this grass, it's right there. So, I actually took this picture, no kidding, yesterday on a camping trip. I came back today, and this has got almost everything. Here's the mature forest back here. We got a few snags scattered around. Here's the shrubbery, and there were so many birds singing here. There were flycatchers going back and forth. There were ducks out here, and I'm sure there were squirrels and animals in the forest over here. So tonight, and I'm almost done, we've made a couple of recommendations, and these are just sort of the topical things, and that would be snags, keep them, make them, boxes, imitation of cavities, piles, cover, it's a way of providing cover, log surrogates, a way of providing cover down on the ground, shrubs, food in the shrubs, and water, food, water, cover, all mixed into these things that you can do. Now, I did not, somebody's going to say, okay, Ken, yeah, that's pretty cool. I appreciate all that, but how do I do this? Ha! So glad you asked, or did you ask? I'm sorry, I turned off the chat box. I'm just yammering here. But the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife has this marvelous thing called Living with Wildlife, which is essentially a web page that leads to a whole collection of essays about pretty much any topic you can think of, from wood duck boxes to down logs to creating a snag. It's all on there. There's this thing called the Woodland Fish and Wildlife series, which I help participate in, and there's a whole bunch of articles on there that are about various topics. The WSU Forestry Extension website, you dig around and you can find this list of resources that has a whole bunch of different links. The Oregon Forest Resources Institute, OFRI, they have a whole bunch of stuff too. And Brendan, I'm not sure if you put some of those links up there, but if you note those, I'm sure you can Google them up and you'll find it. And so, the information about how to build a nest box, that's a really good example. There's lots of it out there, and just figure out how to do it and then apply it consistently on your property, and you will be happy. You will be glad. And I want to remind everybody of this, that, small forest landowners, we have a role, that there's a big deal going on right now, that the sixth extinction event, if you pay attention to natural history in the news, it's like, holy smokes, there's some really bad stuff coming down the pike with insects disappearing, et cetera, et cetera. And we can feel frightened and overwhelmed like I was as this Tyrannosaurus was getting ready to eat me. But we can make a difference. Small forest landowners have this wonderful ability to apply good management, good habitat management on their little piece of the world. And this is something that really excites me about this job, because we have such wonderful clients who do the right thing. And, that's our job, is to help people know what some of those things might be and give you the tools and some insight. And oftentimes we learn from you. And so it's a two-way street. But, I think nature and the animals would like to thank the small forest landowners for doing the right thing and providing habitats over time. And so that's just a little bit of a rambly thought. We're going to put out a woodland fish and wildlife publication a year from now that's going to be on this very topic. And this is my email address. So if we miss something tonight, send me a note, or Brendan, but send me a note and I'll make sure I reply to you. And I might be able to either answer your question or send you to somebody who can. And tell me your good anecdotes. Tell me what you learn, what you think work, particularly about these different topics, because, oh, there we go. There's the links. And so, Brandon, I'd like to point out I'm finishing 1 minute early.
Oh, the minute just turned over. Your minute finishing exactly on time.
Yes.
Nicely done.
Matt, you gotta do that too, pal.
Yeah.
Just
All
kidding.
right, everyone.
I'll try my best.
We've had a very quiet chat window this session, but if anyone has questions, which I'm sure some of you do, go ahead and type them in now and we'll get to all of them. If you need to head out now, you're welcome to. Just to reiterate what I said before, if you do need those teacher clock hours or the Society of American Forester continuing education credits, please do email me and I'll send you what you need to do to get those. But otherwise, we can, between the three of us, Matt, Ken, and I, answer all of your questions. We have one here from Nora that I've been saving for Ken. So Nora asks, if you did not want to encourage coyotes nesting, for example, if you knew your neighbors didn't appreciate the threat to their pets,
Yes.
would you recommend a maximum size habitat pile for birds and smaller animals?
One thing you might do there, Nora, is just make sure that it was really tight in the middle, meaning you're thinking about the scale. I mean, if you were okay with, let's say, chipmunks and you didn't want a coyote, don't provide a big enough hole. Because coyotes they'll dig under something. So in many cases, coyotes won't necessarily use a hollow log unless it's available, and they'll still be around because they can actually burrow into the ground. So it may not matter, but just don't build one of a coyote scale, or even raccoons for that matter, because you could wind up, bringing in more raccoons than you wanted by providing the perfect pile for them to live in, and then they're making quite a fuss in the neighborhood. So
I was under the impression that raccoons moved in wherever they wanted, whenever they wanted, no matter what you did.
Probably, yes. Brendan, I was looking back here. We did you answer the one about someone to do? Quing Zhang asks about.
Yes, I responded to that. So we can't make specific recommendations for our contractors, but I sent a link there for the International Society of Arboriculture website in the Northwest chapter, where you can search for certified arborists, and our consulting directory on the Extension Forestry website, where you can find consulting foresters and silvicultural contractors for sort of larger scale projects.
So Quing, I will suggest, when you make those contacts, ask them specifically if they have experience making habitat trees, because a lot of them do. And if you just need to find somebody who's done it before and go, oh yeah, sure, I can make you a habitat tree. And otherwise you're teaching them how to do it. And so it's pretty interesting because quite a few of them routinely do it now. So yeah, that would be the question. And yeah, so good. Okay, coyotes, go ahead.
Real quick, Colleen asked about the recording being available. We will be sending the recording of this session out to everyone who is registered, even if they didn't show up tonight. It may take us a few days or a week to get it up, but it will be sent out to everyone.
And Ray, I appreciate the comment about getting us sitting in a studio and doing some music and things.
No.
Oh man, that would be a whole nother layer of complexity. But we're talking about doing some field stuff kind of like that. So stay tuned. Yeah.
All right. Emily asks, are bat boxes best deeper in the woods or on the edge?
Oh, Emily, that's an excellent question. Bat boxes are better on the edge. Deep in the woods, they won't get much use. And I'm going to say that about bat boxes in general. I have heard the comment more than once, and I may have already said this, that, oh, I put up a bat box, but I didn't get any bats. I think bats, you think about the way they travel. They're flying around in the open catching flying insects. And if they are above the forest canopy going after insects, you don't see them. And when they go to roost, they just look for a crack, or sometimes they'll even roost on the sides of trees. So in general, on the edge, and kind of in the open. It's pretty interesting. The bat boxes that I've seen that have done the best are often on a warm face or on a pole all by itself, something like that. So Bats Northwest, I should have put that one up there. There's an organization called Bats Northwest that has a whole bunch of information about boxes and placement, and Bat Conservation International too. So bats are a very interesting topic. Yes. Okay.
All right. Ray asks, on my project on Vashon, I have Townsend voles that thrive in the grass and kill just about whatever I plant. If I kill the grass, will it get rid of the voles?
No, but it can help the plants if you scalp back from the plant, so that the voles aren't able to stay under the grass to come right up to the tree. You can also put those little tubes on the base of the trees. You can try predator assist. You can put up some perch poles. That helps. It won't get them all.
I would add to Ray that removing the grass from around anything else you plant is going to help with their drought resistance and moisture needs a lot as well. One of the biggest things you can do for a plant that's struggling in our summer droughts at the moment is remove all the grass from around it. That layer of sod will absorb all the rainfall.
I think Matt is going to say something about planting and success in his next webinar, or is it the one after that, Matt?
He's got a whole entire webinar on it. Go on, Matt.
Yeah. So it's not the next one. I'm doing one Tuesday that is on vegetation management, in which I will touch about grass and fields and things like that. And then I believe it's the following Monday, June 29th, I'm doing one on tree planting, which includes things like, again, fields. And, not only do you have voles, but you have mice, you have rabbits, you have all sorts of stuff. And then grass, as Brendan pointed out, I mean, it's a killer of seedlings. I mean, it is so hard for water to penetrate through that stuff that whether you spray it with chemicals, whether you just mulch it up or pull it back with sod, the sod like Ken was talking about, you need to do something to keep that grass away and help the animals stay away, as well as help the tree in general. At least 2 feet around, right? So if you're doing it by hand and you're planting a lot of trees, that's a lot of work. But, if you keep up on it, you can do it. Really, my predecessor, Julie, she's struggled with this, and she's done some afforestation stuff, and she had some big problems. The best she ever saw, which probably is not going to work on Vashon, but a guy in Lewis County burned his field, and he didn't have any mites or vole problems after that.
For a while.
Well, he got the trees to grow, so it worked enough to get the trees out of the ground. But of course, burning your field's not going to work in every spot.
And you will not be able to trap them out. And I don't know. I always discourage poisons only because you don't know who else you poison when you poison things. And voles are a tough call, but they're in the grassy setting. Basically, yeah, you can armor the plant. You can take the grass back like you're suggesting here. And I've even seen people put aluminum foil around the base of a little teeny seedling. I don't know if that worked or not.
I'd be worried a little bit about the temperature that would cause, because seedlings can often be girdled by high ground temperatures and solar radiation and the buildup of temperature just in the little duff and grass layer there. And putting tinfoil there might exacerbate that problem.
If you Google forest stewardship notes, so WSU and DNR put out a combined publication called Forest Stewardship Notes. I actually just did an article on animal damage in young seedlings and things you can do to manage it. And I actually interviewed Julie Sackett for information on all the things she did, because she's not only dealt with the small little things, she's dealt with elk, she's dealt with beaver, she's dealt with all kinds. She has everything out there on her 70 acres where she's doing a lot of her work.
That was her picture at the start of this presentation.
I just linked that Forest Stewardship Notes article.
Excellent.
Okay.
Rick asks, what annual maintenance on a bat box?
You know, if a bat box is properly constructed, it's going to be straight up and down so the poop falls out. And a bat box is usually used as a roost rather than a maternity colony. And even if there was some reproduction in there, the poop falls out. So really there isn't any. You just need to make sure that it's still intact. And the way you see if it's being used is you either, shine a bright light up in there, watch it at dusk or dawn, and see if there's poop under it. So really, if they're properly constructed, there isn't any. Yeah.
All right. What birds of prey would you expect to get living in a Gary Oak prairie? Thinking of Puget Basin area, a relatively undisturbed area I visit, but never really been able to see any birds of prey so far.
Oh, red-tailed hawks, Cooper's hawks, sharp-shinned hawk, harrier if it had enough grassy area. Most raptors are migratory, meaning they kind of move through the localize and then they move. So keep your eye out, because you should get some good raptor use in that kind of a place. Ooh. Go ahead.
Can you speak to supplemental feeding, such as bird feeders, etc.?
I almost put that in, Ben. That's so interesting you bring that up, because feeding is one of two purposes. The normal purpose is we feed so that we concentrate the animals so we get to look at them. I mean, we do it. We put bird feeders out in the wintertime, take them away in the summer. Why? So we can look at the birds. It's really fun. It's nice. Some people will put like deer feeders out thinking they're enhancing the survival of the deer, which they may, but they may also concentrate the deer and bring the cougars in. So supplemental feeding for survival to try to enhance survival is generally a bad idea, only because you won't necessarily know what levels of animals you're creating, etc. Supplemental feeding for recreational is such a common practice. There's health issues with feeders getting goobers in them that can make the birds sick. And so that's kind of an interesting, almost philosophical question. Is it ethical to put out black oil sunflower seeds so I get to look at the chickadees and then they fly in here and fight with each other? I do it. I don't know whether it's the right thing or not, but it's good.
What about people's concerns about migratory birds like hummingbirds not leaving, Ken?
Oh, okay. Here's one. Hummingbirds. So people put out hummingbird feeders, and in Western Washington in particular, the Anna's hummingbird, many of them stay over the winter, which seems just kind of amazing, is how in the world could they do that? And we hypothesize, we don't know for sure, that one of the reasons that some Anna's hummingbirds have stayed around is the availability of feeders. And if you are one of those people that has an Anna's hummingbird at your hummingbird feeder in November, you got a problem, because if you take the feeder away, what's that bird going to do? It may be too late to migrate. So many people get in kind of a dilemma, and they'll put a heater on it, a light bulb, all these things to keep them around. Whether or not it affects their migration is also debatable. I agree with the opinion that migration is usually hardwired into day length and not resource availability. So the true migrants are going to leave whether or not the feeder is out. And we see it here that at a certain point, certain birds just leave. They're gone. And they leave on even on some of the same sets of days of the year. So I would not have angst over presence or absence of feeders affecting migration, but maybe angst over population supplementation. That's an interesting one. I do it. Okay.
All right. Stephen has one that I can take first. He asks, I have some live trees with conchs, so heart rot. Should I move them along to snags by girdling? Stephen, it depends a little bit on the species, but in general, if they've got conchs on them already, I just let them go, and I'd save yourself the effort. Also, girdling, Ken, I can't remember if you mentioned it. Girdling, well, it's a very good way of creating a snag. Where you cut that girdling cut is going to introduce rot into the tree.
Yep.
So a tree killed by girdling is going to often snap and break off at that girdling point faster than a more intact tree will. So if you can get it to die without girdling it, I would say that's preferable.
And
Now,
go ahead.
I was going to say, however, if these are hazard trees in any way, and you need to get them cut down to a height where they're not dangerous, if they're near your house, then yes, I would quickly do that if you have any sort of conchs on them.
Yes. So any hollow tree in the world became hollow while it was alive. So a tree with a living outer layer, the xylem and the phloem, that has heart rot, they can actually be hollow and still stand there. And often they will be some of the best habitat trees because even before they die, they can get that cavity. And like that larch that I showed a picture of that had all those cavities, that had heart rot. And larches have this particular characteristic that they'll have a hard outer layer and a soft middle, which makes for the perfect cavity tree. So, Stephen, that is indeed a judgment call, and I think Brendan answered that very well. So yeah, if it's already got heart rot, and and the question
if you have a big hollow and rot pockets forming in it, the rotten part of the tree is going to be providing habitat value. Yes. Anyway, even if the rest of the tree is alive.
Yes. And the thing about making snags, and I probably didn't say this adequately, it's relative to what you have in the stand. You don't have to make them if you already have some, or if you already have some that have managed to progress to being cavity trees. So I'm starting to really think about the difference between a snag is a snag is a snag and a cavity tree, meaning one that is big enough and rotten enough to get the hole in it to provide for the woodpeckers and the squirrels and everybody else. And there's a pretty big difference. And one thing about cavity trees, the broken off, and with the hole and everything, you can see them. You can walk around in your forest. It's like, okay, there's one. Okay, there's, a 6-inch in diameter, freshly dead Douglas fir that there's got feeding holes on it, but there's no cavity in that one, but that one right over there. And so those might be the kind of features to really think about providing over time, particularly when you have a relatively small acreage, like 10 acres, 5 acres, 20 acres, where I think one of the beauties of our landowners is the people who are really engaged will know their forest. They'll know individual trees. Oh yeah, I love it when we go out and visit and somebody goes, I want to show you my snag. And we walk down to the bottom corner and, here it is. And it's like to be proud of this habitat feature. And so, you get to influence the dynamic and development of the stand to take it where you want it to go. And I guess part of my whole mission in life is to, is to encourage awareness of what valuable habitat elements are so that they're, something that we do. Oh, there's one. Go ahead, Brendan.
And anyone who still has questions, last call to type them in here while we answer these last few.
Just like last call at the pub.
Exactly, except for that it's about to be first call at the pub.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, last call for questions, first call at the pub. All right, Matthew asked, do some tree species make better snags than others?
And the answer is yes. And the best ones would be cedar, Douglas fir, ironically, cottonwood, ponderosa pine, larch, but it's an opportunistic thing, meaning I always say, you know what, we'll take what we can get. With alders, they really should have a little bit of diameter to them. And because alders self-thin and alders tend to tip over after they die. So, and I would not encourage you to make snags out of your big trees, your best trees, even though those are the ones that would, provide the big pileated cavity the quickest. I mean, big trees on the landscape are something that eventually could wind up as one. But so, Matthew, really, yes, but we'll take what we can get. And so, yeah, some tree species do make better snags. Yes.
Yeah, if I can
Go ahead.
add something real quick. I did want to point out, because I don't think we've mentioned it, that the Natural Resource Conservation Service has funding available to help landowners create some of these habitat features that Ken's been talking about. So they'll help you construct nest pile or those habitat piles. They'll help you construct nest boxes in place of snags, right? They'd also help you create snags if you actually wanted to create snags. But if you are efficient on those features property, so you don't have a lot of snags, you don't have a lot of other stuff, they can help you with that. You'll need a forest management plan, which I can certainly help you with, so you can get a hold of me and we can help write a plan for you. And you can take the coach planning class that WSU offers too, and you can write your own plan through that, and that's a really good program, and you can become eligible for funding for this stuff. And they allow in-kind work, or you can hire a contractor, so you can even pay yourself to do it.
So I didn't make this stuff up. NRCS even throws it out there too.
And your local conservation districts are great go-betweens between you and the NRCS for share grants like that.
Yeah, because sometimes people they'll say, okay, I want to do habitat enhancements. And then we write the plan. And then you can actually figure out some strategies where it's not just random. It's like, okay, I'm going to have, nest boxes around the perimeter, and I'm going to make 6 snags over there, and I'm going to create a wildlife guzzler over there. However you go about it. And that is really one of the best outcomes, because you're consciously designing habitat complexity into your forest.
All right. So, best design for a wildlife guzzler. Aren't you a wildlife guzzler, Ken?
I will be in a few minutes. Rick, there's this thing called a guzzler that
I was about to ask, what is a guzzler?
Well, there's this design that they use in dry country that has like a couple of collecting surfaces, and then this tank that the water goes underneath, and there's this little place where animals can walk down and get a drink. So I'm not sure what you're asking there. If it kind of depends on where you are, and there's many different approaches to that, but a guzzler per se is a dry country created thing. And I don't know, I wouldn't have an opinion about what a best design was. So Rick, send me an email offline and I'll send you a couple ideas.
Right.
Relative
it looks
to
like
where
they
you
just
are.
involve a catchment area draining into a lined pool of some sort. So it looks like there's many good designs for it.
You were Googling it, aren't you?
I am Googling it.
You were good.
I mean, I Googled it. I had to refine my search, because when I Googled it, I just got pictures of Ken Bevis. But
you did not. Oh, there you go. There you go. So good. So Rick, let's do a little email exchange, and I'd be curious about what we find on that too.
All right. So Stephen asks, if we're thinning, how many trees should we leave on the ground? So Stephen, one of the first things you might consider if you're thinning and not clear cutting, but you're leaving trees standing, is that you also don't want to be creating so much dead wood in 1 year that you attract a beetle outbreak. So that's going to depend on where you are and what species you have, how much you need to be concerned with that. But the rule of thumb is that for most beetles and tree species, you don't want to create more than 5 dead trees that are attractive to a certain type of beetle per acre in 1 year. So for example, Douglas fir beetle generally targets Douglas fir larger than 10 inches diameter. So you don't want more than 10 or more than 5 dead Douglas fir on your property being created in each year. Now that's per year, so you could slowly create more than that, but that's going to be a consideration for you. Other than that, Ken, do you want to say is there an optimal number of dead wood or dead trees to have on the property?
No, I think in terms of the ground-based fauna, so let's say the the little squirrels and the things that are running around under the downwood, they would be totally happy with a jackstraw pile of logs all through the forest. So how many should you leave? Certainly some. And part of the idea with the surrogates and the piles is to concentrate it so that you can do uh, the other work. So, Stephen, I think the answer would be within the realm of not creating the bug hazard to your live trees and however many you're comfortable with.
Yeah, if I can add, I would say that I think that's a very site specific answer. And so, Ken does site visits. I do site visits. So if you're in Western Washington, Stephen, you can call Ken and I would be happy to come out and visit your property.
Yeah.
And we can not only talk about how much to leave standing, but how much to put on the ground as well for you.
Stephen, I think we came to your place, didn't we?
Yes, I think
Boyd and I did.
I think you did as well.
Yeah.
So you're also welcome to send us an email and some photos in the description.
That's what I thought. Yep.
Either to myself or to Matt.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Kat has a question about providing a wind block for birds. Not a birdhouse, just a really fantastic protection from storms that functions as a roost. Is that a thing, or am I being imaginative?
Well, Kat, aren't you describing a habitat pile? Maybe a habitat pile with a little bit of even a more well-developed side on it. So I'm almost like a chicken coop with a whole bunch of interstitial space where they could get in it.
Yeah, I think she's describing something up in the trees. Yeah, she just
said.
High up.
You could. It would work. And you know what functions like that is dwarf mistletoe. Dwarf mistletoe in the top of a tree, this big, thick, dense, multi-layered thing. Birds will go in there in a storm. So you are not off base there at all. And just think like a brush clump if you could get it up in a tree. Yeah.
I'm just imagining flocks of spotted owls getting blown out of the forest by the storm.
No, they're all going to go over to Kat's place and hang out in the things.
Yes. Zara, yes, dwarf mistletoe is a parasite on the trees. So it's not optimal for your tree's health, but it creates great habitat in the trees.
Thank you. Dwarf mistletoe is a really interesting dilemma because it actually creates almost like what Kat's describing there, nesting for owls and squirrels and all sorts of things, but it diminishes the growth rate of the tree, doesn't kill it outright. It's a parasite. And so we will try to say, tolerate it when you can. And if you have it, there's a joke that the biologist would say, that tree is blessed with mistletoe as habitat, and the forester would say, it's cursed with mistletoe. We've got to do something about it. And so,
maybe Matt will add to this, but I would say unless you are trying to maximize timber output, I wouldn't worry about mistletoe.
Yeah, in Western Washington, it's essentially not a thing for the most part. You can get a little bit in hemlock. We don't have any fir mistletoe in Western Washington. Get some witch's broom sometimes.
We have a few patches of Douglas, not to correct you too much, but we down in the south, there's some patches of Douglas fir mistletoe. And then I ran into it up on San Juan when we were doing the coach wedding last summer.
So that's interesting. Did you actually see the plant? Because I was just talking with the pathologist, and they have not seen it in Western Washington.
We found it on the ground underneath Douglas fir full of witches' brooms.
Yeah, that'd be really good information to share with the pathologist then, because they're working on the assumption that it doesn't even exist.
Really?
And there's been a few reports of it, but anytime the pathologists have said, "Have you seen the plant?" the answer has been no. And so they say, well, then you don't have mistletoe until we actually see the plant.
Right. We found the broken off twigs of it on the ground underneath.
Yeah, that'd be really good information to have. Either way, it sounds like it's pretty rare in Western Washington. If you're in Eastern Washington, it can cause significant problems in your stands. If wildlife is a concern or is one of your main objectives, it can be good, but it can cause some significant problems with growth and timber form.
Yeah. And if you're on Whidbey, you have a lot of it in your hemlock.
Yeah, hemlock mistletoe is definitely a thing.
Yeah.
It is a really, really valuable habitat feature. And there's one discussion that it may be a keystone species for spotted owls and flying squirrels in east side forest because it creates these dense clumps that otherwise don't exist. So this is a really interesting discussion because dwarf mistletoe is really maybe the clearest conflict between growing trees and wildlife habitat. It's like, yep, it does that and it does that. Nice. Did you say, Brendan, did you say you're going to corrupt Matt?
Correct.
I said correct. Yeah.
Okay.
But I'm
already corrupted.
Was it Dan Omdahl that was working on that, or?
Yeah, Dan
Okay.
Omdahl and Glenn Kohler.
Okay. I'll send them an email then.
Just like last week, Glenn and I were talking about the lack of dwarf mistletoe in Western Washington.
Okay. I'll send them an email, and I think I could even find the tree for them again.
Yeah,
and if you took at Camp Orkila.
Did you take pictures?
I may have taken some pictures. I think Ken took some pictures. I need to get better at taking pictures.
Very good. Well,
Kurt says he has lots of dwarf mistletoe and makes the trees very ugly. I cut it out when I can.
You can. One strategy is to just prune them out of there.
If it's on the smaller branches, right? But
well, no, it's because it's a parasitic plant that has its roots literally in the cambium.
No, I know, but
it's not down in the stem. It's on the branch.
But you're going to do a lot of damage to the cambium.
Yeah, probably. So maybe we should do a whole webinar on mistletoe.
Yeah.
We could.
State of the knowledge in mistletoe right now.
Well, the whole discussion of forest health and the various entities and pathogens and interaction, and and I have the little bit of luxury that I just like to see the critters running around. So everybody has my email here now. It looks like I think, did we miss any questions? Did anybody miss them?
No, I think that was all of them. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us again. I'm going to end the webinar here and enjoy the rest of your evenings.
So everybody, thank you again so much. Take Coach Planning if you haven't. Reach out to Matt and I. Steve Esham, I'd like to come visit you and your dad again. And yeah, what fun. And so thanks to WSU for hosting us on this. And thanks to all you lovely people out there for watching in, and what fun.